stockpiling pens today.
I would like to call the meeting back to order and ask those who are willing and able to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and welcome. I'd like to remind everyone to turn on their microphones and keep them on for the duration of the meeting. I would like to begin with introductions. Good evening. My name is Jennifer Laird, Board President. To my left is
Bo Wright, Superintendent of Schools.
George Day Marteau, attorney for the district.
Good evening, Nikki LaPlaca, board member.
In the nick of time, James O'Brien, board member.
Hi everyone, Maurice Brzezinski, board member.
Dina Wilson, Assistant Superintendent for Instruction.
Good evening, Andy Whitmore, Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations.
Good evening, Nerlana Sam, Assistant Superintendent of Student and Family Services.
Good evening, Doug Rivers, board member.
Good evening, Di McBride, board member.
Hi everyone, Karen Flanagan, school district clerk.
Hello everyone, May Abdullah, board vice president.
Thank you. And I'd say with student reports, students are not here this evening? Okay. Then, thank you. This will bring us to our public portion of the meeting. This is for any items that are not on our agenda. If anyone would like to speak regarding an item on our agenda, please wait for the presenter to end their presentation, then raise your hand to be recognized. We ask that all speakers please limit their time to 3 minutes. And we have 2 speakers signed up this evening. First, Brian Usselman.
No, just on the other side there's a button, Brian. Just,
Turn them around.
Turn 'em around.
Or lay it down, you'll see the button.
There you go.
Okay. Good evening. By now, Pat and his team have shown you our counter proposal from last Friday. Although there is still much work to be completed, the RHA feels we're getting closer to an agreement that will satisfy both sides. This contract settlement is not about winning, because if there's a winner, then we also have to have a loser. It's about agreeing to salary and a benefit package that attracts and retains teachers to Rush-Henrietta. It's about making the teacher's workday more productive. It's about setting up retirees of the teaching force for life after retirement. The RHA negotiation team looks forward to hearing from the district very soon so we can continue this negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Rachel Sherman.
I just came from the rec center, so please excuse my manner of dress. I'd like to look a little more professional here. Hi, I'm Rachel Sherman. I'm parent of Ellie at Winslow, Susie at Sherman, Noah at Roth, and I'm a 1994 RH grad. I've been here before, and you'll see me again. So 2 topics. One, I wanted to thank the board for piloting the streaming of board meetings online. I am extremely interested in my children's education and the well-being of all the students in the district. And so the board meetings for me are very educational. I've been away my whole adult life, although I did grow up here. So I'm learning a lot from the meetings. And when I can't attend in person, I try to catch up online. So I would encourage you, if there could be a tweak, to upload just the audio file, and then I could actually listen to it while I drive. That would be helpful, if that's a possibility. And I would ask you to continue it beyond the pilot period. I think it's an important equity matter so that all parents can be informed, even if their life circumstances do not allow them to be here, community members as well, not just parents. I think it's important to transparency. Your decision-making process, the information that's brought before you should occur before as many public eyes as possible, since you are a public body and mostly elected, though some of you have been appointed, and all accountable to the residents of Rush-Henrietta. My second comment is on your policy, not to comment on the public comments. I think you've been given bad advice on that front, and I ask you to reconsider it. For people who bring you comments and concerns, it appears as if they just go into a black hole, never to be seen or heard about again. It is not confidence inspiring, it is confidence squelching. So I was here in the fall presenting you volumes of research on the incredible benefits of starting school later on our adolescent students. The research demonstrates that starting school later reduces absenteeism, increases test scores, improves sports performance, decreases injuries, reduces teen-involved car crashes, and many other benefits. I've asked you to take certain steps, and no one has responded to me. I am not here in this forum, not by email, not by phone call. If I have emailed you, someone has said, thank you for your email, but not substantively on the matter that I have brought up before you. So I do think you would improve your functioning as a public body if you would let those who take the time to come before you know when and how they will hear back from you substantively on the matters that have been raised before you. So please consider doing away with this antiquated and unhelpful rule of not responding to public comments. Would anyone like to respond to me now? Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Any topics? Seeing none, this now closes our public forum. We now move into our regularly scheduled items. Item 1 is consent agenda items in routine matter. This consists of award-winning bids, CSE recommendations, finance and audit, and board updates. I
apologize for interrupting. We did have someone stand. It just looked
Oh,
like she
I'm sorry.
wasn't.
I'm sorry. Come on up. I thought you were getting up to leave. I apologize.
No, I was just, I haven't had a chance to introduce myself to the board and to everyone here. I am the newly elected town board member and the new liaison from town board to school board. So if I have an opportunity, I'd love to speak with you, and if there's any concerns or anything that I can communicate back to town board, that's very much appreciated.
What's your name?
Millie Sofronic.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Millie.
Yep, thank you.
I apologize again. I'd like a motion to approve consent agenda items, moved by Anne Marie, seconded by Doug. Any discussions? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The consent agendas are passed. Next is item 9, personnel actions. I will accept a motion to approve the personnel actions, moved by Nikki, seconded by Diane. Any discussions on personnel actions? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Personnel actions are approved. Item 9 is an amendment to the superintendent's contract. I will accept a motion to approve the amendment to the superintendent's contract, moved by James, seconded by Nikki. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed, nay. The superintendent's contract amendment is approved. This will bring us to our first and exciting workshop by Andy. We are looking at the external audit reports.
All right. And I'm sorry, Karen, will I do this, will you be able to get the air media up on there for my next presentation?
I just have to take this down.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So the audits, in the fall, we have 2 audits that are continuation of our year-end audit. They cover the 2018-19 school year. We had our big main audit over our financials was presented in October to the board. The auditors come back and they do 2 audits. One is the single audit, the other is the extra classroom activities audit. The single audit's named single audit because it combines a number of federal grants into one single audit. Rather than auditing each grant, it combines them into one. And these are pass-through grants, so it means they go to New York State, and then New York State filters it down to us. So we don't report directly to the federal government. We report to New York, who reports to the federal government, but we have to be audited. So we have 9 different federal grants totaling about $3.8 million. There's 1 audit for these grants. The major grants in there are school lunch, also IDA and Title I. But with the single audit, we did receive a clean audit, which means we were in full compliance with the federal regulations, so there were no issues there. The other audit is the extra classroom activity funds, what we call student state. So these are after-school clubs or activities that students are interested in outside of the school day. They're student funds. We have about $400,000 running through these student funds. So they aren't district funds, they're student funds, but because it's under the auspices of the district, we audit those as well to make sure they're being properly maintained. These typically are more of a challenge because neither the faculty advisor nor the students who run the club have strong financial backgrounds. So each school has a central treasurer who works with them. We did have a number of process audit comments, which we typically do every year, thank you, because of the turnover in students and staff. But overall, the auditors were pleased, but we do have a number of things. So we developed a corrective action plan, which was in your package, and the bulk of it is training and reminding, whether it's the faculty advisors or the new student treasurers. So that's a summary of the audits. Any questions?
Great job on the recommendations.
Thank you. They come from each school. They come up with them.
Okay. I'd like a motion pertaining to the acceptance of the auditor's single audit report ending in June 30th, 2019. Moved by Nikki, seconded by Anne Marie. Any discussions? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The audit report is accepted. This brings us to accepting the classroom activity funds report. Moved by Diane, seconded by Nikki. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. This report is now accepted. And last, we have our motion pertaining to the acceptance of Rush-Henrietta extra classroom activity funds, the audit correction action plan. Moved by Diane, seconded by James. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. That is accepted as well. Another fun topic, budget development.
It is.
Nikki's favorite.
All right. To kick us off, you've seen the first part of this, the budget overview, so I won't go through it again. The second page was the spending. We went through that in detail in December. What I did on the next slide was just try and summarize the major categories to remind you of where we stand. Because we're a people business, our big cost drivers are our contractual wages and salaries. That's you'll see the 4.2% year-over-year increase in that. It's a combination of contractual increases, new positions, and the impact of the minimum wage. We do have lots of positions at the lower end of the wage scale, so minimum wage is beginning to affect us quite a bit. The other big driver we have are employee benefits, the pension costs, New York State pension, and our health insurance are the big increase there. And then BOCES was our other one due to our increased number of special ed students that we have moving into the district, and some of who are being placed in BOCES. When we talked, so that's the $5 million increase that we talked about in December. The piece we now have a better handle on is revenue. We did not show you a detailed revenue in December. We talked about it last meeting. We do have some better answers. Property taxes, the last piece that we needed was the official cost of living adjustment. They were allowed to grow. That was a little bit higher, so we're getting about an extra $100,000 through the tax cap calculation. Our pilots, we talked about increasing about $600,000. We did get the governor's proposal for state aid. We got a little bit more money there. And the biggest piece really was in building aid. So our building aid came in a bit higher than we projected. Our foundation aid is a very small increase. It's about a $60,000 increase. But with our building aid, we ended up about $1,000 more than we anticipated. So if you look at the bottom line, the budget gap, that brings us to a gap of about $600,000. So last time we talked, it was about $900,000. So we're going the right direction. The next page just shows how we do close the gap. Every year we use an appropriated fund balance of about $2.8 million. As you know, we try to budget a bit conservatively to avoid mid-year cuts. Because we typically have a bit of money left over, we call that appropriated fund balance. It's the same amount of money that gets carried over year over year. If we ever have to dig into it, we know we budgeted too tightly. It's not a recurring revenue, it's the same amount year over year, but to avoid unnecessary reductions, we built that into the budget. In the last few years, we've started using our reserves because of the impact of the tax cap. Last year, we used $635,000. Into our base budget this year, we built $1 million, and that brings us down to our $600,000 gap. And just to put in perspective, that $1 million, they're coming out of two reserves, the employee benefit and the ERS retirement reserve. In total, those are almost $8 million, so we're only using $1 million out of the $8 million that we have. However, as with every budget, needs change, and so what we always have are budget additions or proposals. So the cabinet, the administrators work through these, the cabinet's reviewed them, and I'll let Bo take us through what the recommended ones are.
So I'm going to walk you through what the recommended budget additions are, and then I'll turn things over to Andy after we get through that to talk about what the recommended reductions are going to look like. If you remember, when we had the conversation this fall, you said that you would like to see two proposals, one that blends strategic reductions with use of reserves, and then another to see what it would look like if we balance the gap strictly through reductions. So as Andy said, every year needs and wants change, but to use a saying that Dr. Graham used to say at this table, we have to sift through what's nice versus what's necessary, right? So the process that we use is this. The proposals come in December. As a cabinet, we review them. This year, every single proposal, whether it came from a cabinet member, a building administrator, a director, or we even had a proposal come through from student council, they were required to come to the administrators group at school forum and make their case, if you will. They talked about the cost impact to the budget, and they talk about the rationale for why they feel that this is needed. So after each group had the opportunity to present at school forum, then we go back as a cabinet, we sort of push and pull on each other a little bit as far as what the recommendation should be, and we whittled down the list. Initially, the list equated to about just over $450,000 worth of proposals. We brought it down to $250,000 approximately, but we do feel like the items that we're recommending to you are not niceties. We feel like these are things that are necessary in their own right. So the first is the replacement of aging AED devices, and you see a 0 there because that can be absorbed through grant funding, but it's something that we have to get on a rolling cycle in terms of replacing those devices. It's really about safety. So that's something that we're recommending, and we're able to do it without burdening the general fund. We're still working out, the student cafe has been wildly popular, and is in some respects a little bit more than we bargained for, but that's okay. It's a good problem to have. So we're trying to figure out how to maximize that space. We see the potential there, and so we're trying to work with the folks at the high school around that. We're still working out the specifics on the support, but the $24,000 represents what we believe would be a maximum amount that would be required to help them get started with seed money so that they can utilize that before school, during the school day, and possibly even after the school day, because we're short on capacity right now. So we feel like that's warranted. We invested the money in the space. It's beautiful. People love it. So we figure that we should figure out a way to fully utilize it. The third item came from Student Council. This is in support of some of the green initiatives that has been talked about at this table by our student liaisons. We're going to talk more about what we could and maybe should be doing as an organization to support their work as student leaders. I think no one would argue that it's the right thing to support. We have a responsibility to our community and to future generations to figure out how we can be greener. I think the rub only exists in terms of what's feasible, right, from a capacity perspective and a cost perspective. But we do feel like we should set aside $8,000. Their proposal centered around doing some auditing, and they're working with RIT right now. So we want to see what happens with that relationship, their sustainability program. There's some real possibilities there, so we're waiting to see what comes out of that potential partnership. They asked for the Dyson hand dryers, so the $8,000 would primarily go to support adding more Dysons in the most frequently used bathrooms. And then we're also trying to figure out ways to work with building funds to support like a sustainability club at the school. But we did want to set aside $8,000 in support of those initiatives, and the next presentation is going to go a little bit deeper into some ideas we have for the potential to take some big steps in that direction. Item number 4 is it's a mandate, so we need to support the increased random drug testing for folks in the transportation department. That's not something that we have a whole lot of choice with as a district. And then I said the things that are on this list, they're necessities. Item 5 represents 2 full-time teachers, and that's enrollment driven. As you saw with the space committee findings, we're taking a lot more kids in than we have in the past, and that will continue for the foreseeable future. And then lastly, you remember the changes that we proposed in last year's budget cycle to the mathematics program to try and create some better options for students. It's very early on, but there's been a lot of interest in the new programs that we're offering, so it looks good initially. If you'll remember, there were no associated costs last year other than planning and I think some professional development. But we knew that in this year's budget cycle, we would have to add some staffing. That may, that's sort of the higher end. That number may be a little bit less because it may not require a full-time FTE, but we're not positive yet, so we put it in as a full, and that way, if it winds up being less, then it's a bonus. So the total amount is a shade under 250,000, but like I said, that these aren't fluff items. We feel that these items are needed, and so that does push the gap above 866,000. And so Andy's going to be talking to you about how we propose to bridge the gap.
So, yeah, even with the additions, now we're back to where we thought we were last time we talked to you, roughly $900,000. And as the superintendent mentioned, you had requested we look at closing the gap two ways. One is half cuts, half reserve usage. And quite frankly, that is our recommended. We would recommend that to you, because when you see some of the cuts it would take to close the total gap. All cuts are painful. These positions are here for a reason, but some are even more painful than others. So we're starting off, the two columns, it's the same gap, so we'll start with the column on the left. Turnover savings, we know every year we get teachers who retire. The new teachers who we hire come in at a lower salary, so we get turnover savings. So that's our one painless gap closing. So we're anticipating about $120,000 through that. Number two is reducing the growth in our EMCC slots. For years, we've hovered between 95 and 105 kids going to EMCC. Last year, that jumped up to 115. And we don't want to take away the opportunity from any student who wants to do it. The challenge here is a great number of these kids who sign up end up dropping out, many of them before they even go to the first class. And once you sign up, commit to the slot, you pay for it. And they're $10,000 a slot. So what we're going to ask the counselors to do is screen the appropriateness and the desirability, the fit of that course before we sign up, to get back towards the more traditional rate of 105. And even that, we still rarely, we typically end up with fewer kids going, but it gives most kids who truly want that opportunity the benefit of doing it. But we think if we do a little bit better screening and coaching, we won't have to commit to slots that the kids never end up going to. So that's $100,000. Number three is a junior high school ELA coach. This was a new temporary position a few years ago. We talked about last year it possibly coming out. We think this year we would recommend removing that. And as you see at the bottom, any of these personnel changes, we don't anticipate any of them causing layoffs. They'll be done through attrition. So basically, we anticipate an ELA retirement, so the coach would go back to the classroom, basically. There's a teacher aide at the high school who helps with ENL, with a review of that program. There's a feeling that aide isn't needed. We have adequate capacity with the ENL teachers that we have, so we would reassign that aide to somewhere else. And then special education, that staffing has grown quite a bit the last few years. There's been a lot of analysis to look at the effectiveness of the programs and how we're doing it. And the special ed folks are comfortable we could reduce 2 staffs and still maintain the level of services that we need to keep our students moving forward. So those would be our recommended cuts. So about $466,000. And if we stop there, we would need an additional $400,000 from our reserves. So you can, if you remember, we have about $8 million. We're already planning on using $1 million. This would be an additional $400,000. And quite frankly, there's a good chance that we'll end up getting a bit more state aid through this process. We're not going to get $1 million more, but if we do get more aid, we would reduce that reserve usage. That happened last year. That's why we got down to $635,000. So that would be our recommendation this year. close the gap with reserve usage, but then if we get incremental state aid, reduce that reserve usage. However, if you don't want to roll the dice and if you prefer to keep going because you know we're in a structural deficit, and at some point in the next few years, the cuts will start getting more painful, these are the next round of cuts. We do have a junior high school math coach who's done a lot of work at the junior high school. It's a worthwhile position, but if we have to cut, these are some of the extra supports that we'd have to take out. Same thing with the district-wide reading TOSA. We added that position a few years ago. They've brought a lot of benefit, but there again, it's a new position that would have to come back out as the budget gets tighter. Professional development, we would tweak that budget a little bit, take about $11,000 out, just tighten up a little bit. And the next two were new adds in this year's budget. First one is number 9, Roth building improvements. As you know, Roth is our oldest building. It does need refreshing, so we put in $100,000 to do some work there. We could take that out if that's your desire. And same thing with 10, the learning environment pilot. There's a lot of desire on teachers and administrators to start moving forward in how we set up our classrooms to make them effective for today's learning environment. So that pilot would start getting us an understanding and allowing us to move forward. We could either cancel or postpone that pilot. And then the last thing, we're looking at class size increase. So this would be a tweak to balance it. We'd need 1.7 positions, but ultimately under the tax cap, this is probably where we're headed. So this wouldn't be a full grade level, but we'd probably tweak class sizes to close the gap. So we could eliminate the total gap through reductions, but our recommendation would be a mixture of reductions and reserve usage.
So what we're really looking for is guidance from you all. We're looking to see if you're supportive of essentially the budget additions and our strategy for closing the gap this year.
Andy, what were the improvements at Roth looking like?
What they would be this year with new gym bleachers. They're getting pretty much inoperable, they're so old, as well as stripping and redoing the floor. So it's focused on the gymnasium.
Any other questions? Sharon?
Yes, so question for you about the junior high math coach and ELA coach. Are those coaches at Roth or Berger or both?
They support both schools.
And, you know, my heart breaks about, you know, what has happened at the Rochester City School District. Obviously, I'm sure you all read the news and are well aware of the budget problems that they're having there. It makes me want to know a little bit more about what are the areas where variability can occur on big numbers, and what kind of scenario planning do we do to be ready for, you know, I mean, I don't know if we're self-funded on our health insurance or not. That was an issue in the city, and what do we do to look at those trends, those costs, think about worst-case scenarios, et cetera?
We have lots of variability within the budget. You saw the biggest cost drivers were people and benefits. We don't know today what the 2021 health insurance rate increase will be. We're part of a consortium, and the consortium is self-funded, and that'll be experience. So this year the rate went up 8.5%. Next year, nobody knows. So we do try to budget conservatively, because if we budget too tightly and the worst case happens, we end up with mid-year cuts. And that's drastic. Nobody wants to do that. And that's why we have the $2.8 million savings account, basically, that we plugged. We budget for the worst case cost, and typically we don't use it all. So we're able to carry that $2.8 million over. but all of our costs are variable. Even with staff, we know what our contractual costs are, but nobody knows what our true retirement rate will be, the number of teachers that might go out on maternity leave, how many sick days we'll use. So every cost we have is variable. Our special ed costs are a prime example. This year's budget is up double digits because of the number of students who moved in. So what we try to do is budget conservatively so we don't have the mid-year cuts.
And I'm sorry, last question. The tax cap versus the inflation rate, not a lot of play in the joints there. You know, it's how do we, you know, not fall behind? Won't there be a day where, I mean, I don't know if this board has ever, since the tax cap came into play, recommended an increase over and above, but I think there has to be some messaging to the public here that you cannot stay within a tax cap and not fall further and further and further behind.
Right, we're in a structural
by definition.
deficit, exactly.
Oh,
We're
is
in a
that what you mean?
structural
Wait, I'm
deficit.
sorry, that's what you mean?
Right,
Say
the
that?
tax cap rate of increase on the revenue side does not grow fast enough to keep up with our expense side. But a few years ago, the board made the strategic decision to slowly bleed off our reserves before we go out and ask for an override. Because if you've seen with our neighbors, an override is no guarantee. So we want to prove to the public that we've exhausted all options, and that's why we've balanced with reserves.
I mean, there's lots of stuff coming out on Facebook. I think more messaging probably would be good to prepare people. I mean, I read a lot, and I'm not hearing anything about it.
Well, I'd like to make that comment that as we get closer to finalizing what this budget is, we have a communication plan, and it is through Facebook, and it is our website, and there's a budget newsletter that goes up. So we have lots of ways that we reach out to our community to get the information out. But we don't get all the detail until we kind of get more finalized here with what we would recommend.
Every single PTO will get a budget presentation.
PTOs are not that well attended, but yeah, I mean,
PTO,
it's good.
senior center, we have a budget community forum night, so we have lots of opportunities to get the message out.
Andy, can you go back to explaining number 5 for me? Because in my head, I'm thinking about how we got, we have an increase in our special ed students. And are we proposing to cut some staffing, or?
Well, we would get it through attrition, but yes, as our number of special ed students is growing, some are placed outside the district, some are placed within the district, but we've expanded our ICOP model, which is a very rich staffing model, and we're looking at being able to use the consultant teacher model a little bit more effectively. We don't always, and I'm probably not saying this right because I'm not a special education expert, but basically there's different ways to provide services, and it depends on the level of need of the children, and some of the children were providing a higher level of service than needs to be. A lot of it can be done through consultant teacher, working with a classroom teacher, because a lot of these students are in the normal gen ed classroom, they just need extra supports. And so how we provide those extra supports, now that we're done adding, we've looked at the results, we look at what is more effective, we're starting to refine now and believe we can start differentiating the level of service depending on the level of needs of the students. We're better able to match the services with the needs.
So all IEPs will continue to be met.
Right.
It just in a more efficient manner.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a reallocation, and
Right.
also no one will be laid off through any of these reductions.
It's always attrition.
And what we look on a yearly basis is basically the students who are in district right now and we plan to go through for them. So even students who are coming up through the CPSC process, we take a look at the number of students, what are their needs, and we basically take a look at junior high, junior high, the K-6, and also the 10-12, where we are at, what is the staffing requirement, what are the requirements of the programming for the student. And based on that, we are able to make some determination in terms of if we were to meet all students' needs, here's what we can do. If we have 24 staff members, we really truly, based on the programming need, needs 23. And so that's how we were able to do that. We had a long conversation yesterday, and we looked at all of these programs that we currently have. And remember, we consolidated some of the CT services for more efficiency at one particular school, so we looked at all of that yesterday as well.
I have a question about the junior high school ELA coach. I remember our visit at Roth, they were doing a lot with ELA. Are they in a position where they can continue that work without a coach?
Well, right now, when we started this process a few weeks ago, we did say yes to that, that we felt as we were. However, over the last couple weeks, you know, now that we're looking more strategically based on some information we got through the ESSA results and so forth, we do find that our position is starting to get utilized a little bit more. So I just met with the junior high school principal yesterday, our director of ELA and math. So we're thinking about some of the TOSA positions, so we're evaluating that again. Remember, this all occurred over the last 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So now that, you know, the teachers are working a little bit on more data that we have, and also thinking about some more specific action steps to take between now and April that Carrie's been working with them on, we do see the gentleman that's in that position being utilized a little bit more. So we can evaluate that. If not that TOSA position, we can always think about what other TOSA positions, you know, we could kind of vary in there. So we do sense the junior high school need and how things have changed a little bit over the last couple of weeks about what teachers are asking for in needs of support. So, but we know that we do have, you know, the TOSA positions are those extra support. So if not that position, let's say we decide that the junior high and the math and the ELA we want to keep for another year, especially due to Roth. We might even shift a little bit more to Roth, and we have a burger kind of thing with the information that Pat shared with you just 2 weeks ago. That's why we still have like the district-wide reading TOSA up there too. So that might vary a little bit over the next couple weeks, and that's like getting back to Diane's point. None of this is written in stone just yet, and this is just our preliminary thoughts. And over the next couple of weeks, depending on enrollment, depending on, you know, things that we learn as far as the instructional lens, there might be some minor adjustments. But we are sensitive to the Roth situation and the supports that we need there.
I do want to jump on that because I think that it's an important point. As we think about our budgeting principles, that conversation around equity and making sure that schools get what they need, right, to support equitable outcomes. I think that that's something that we're going to have to look at, especially given the new ESSA regulations and how that may, and the challenges that may present for some of our schools. So I think as we get deeper into the conversation and as we go through tallies and get a sense of what enrollment's going to look like and what the needs are going to be by building, you know, at this point we're not saying I'm going to be coming back to you and saying, well, we have a couple more budget proposals necessarily, but it may mean that we're reallocating resources to places where they're needed most.
And unfortunately, there's no easy budget reductions. What we looked at was twice as much as what you see on this page. And these were the least easy, I mean, the least hard. There were none were easy because they're there for a good reason.
Right.
So at this point, I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
Is there any way to bridge some of this gap using Perkins funding, like programs like PTAC or anything like that? Because some of the services we're already providing, but the thing is there's additional funding that, or grants, like the PTAC program, but you can build that in and then get additional sources of revenue. The thing you really kind of already doing, but make it richer, stronger, and then help bridge some of that.
Yeah, I don't believe we would qualify for Perkins. I know BOCES does, so our kids who go there are getting the advantage.
Grants or anything.
We do. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. We try to be careful with those kinds of grants because you don't want to plug in something that's a short amount of time with money, resources, when it's an ongoing piece. That's not the way to build a budget. You can use grants for short-term things you might have going on in your budget, but if it's a long-term things that just keep rolling over, that is not a way to build a budget because when that funding disappears, you're right back to where you were.
We are very aggressive at going after grants, but because school districts are taxable, a lot of the private foundations don't consider us because they figure we can tax. But over the years, like Dina was able to secure a $1.9 million grant over a few years to kick off our STEM program, and that's how we seeded that. So as the opportunities arise, we do pursue them.
We're also working with a grant writer now as well, which provides additional opportunities. But as Diane said, if you're talking about providing infrastructure or initial trainings or startup costs, we tend to use grant funding for those sorts of things. But anything that has to be sustained over the long haul, we've always shied away from that.
Ms. Sherman?
Yeah, I'm sorry, just surprised me that you said school districts are taxable, because, I mean, I've worked for private foundations for a very long time, and we've given grants to school districts, so I guess I'd ask you maybe to check in on that.
We do, and sometimes you get one-time grants, but it's very difficult to get sustainable grants. Like the federal grants, we know incur year over year, so we can put personnel costs in there, but most other grants tend to be one-time things, so we use them for one-time initiatives.
Yeah, okay.
But,
It surprised me
but
what you said.
significant, we haven't had a lot of success with foundations and things like that. A few years ago, we made an all-out effort to go pursue those, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity. It's not to say there's no opportunity, and as the superintendent mentioned, we just hired another grant writer to advise us, so we will look at those opportunities rise.
So what do we feel comfortable with? Do we feel comfortable using the all reduction or the recommended cuts with using some of our reserves?
The blended approach.
Blended? Blended?
I don't think our mics are working. Just FYI.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Check, check. Right.
Yeah.
First thought one.
Okay.
Testing.
So, you need to vote for this?
No, I think it's just
Okay.
general consensus he needs going forward.
Yeah.
Not a vote.
Okay. Awesome.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, what we need. Thank you.
Great. And our next up is our solar project. Solar energy?
Yep.
Anyone?
We're getting there.
Was it Andy too?
You both, oh.
Well, as some of you may remember, under Section 478, under the real property tax law, it provides for a 15-year exemption from property taxes for renewable energy projects, unless the district opts out, which we essentially did in fall of 2018, if you remember. And what that meant is that the district essentially reserves the right to either fully tax that entity or enter into a negotiated pilot agreement. We are in a position now where we've had a few projects come before us. One that is pending with the town of Rush, and it doesn't look like that's necessarily going to be resolved anytime soon. But we have been in conversations with them. I believe you pronounced their company's name, Invenergy. Really what we decide to do with that particular project hinges on what the town of Rush decides to do, and we've been very clear with them about that the ultimate decision rests with them. But if it's supported by the town of Rush, then we have some ideas as to how we might be able to become greener as a school community, and also, enter into a partnership with them in lieu of a cash pilot. And then most recently, we've been in conversations with Steve about some of the potential solar projects that he discussed today at the State of the Town. So we're going to walk you through what some of these look like, and then starting with the end in mind. Again, this will be something that we have some ideas about how we want to proceed, And so we'll be looking to you to get guidance as to what you're willing to support and what you aren't. And I'm guessing that that's why Steve's here, because he wants to get a sense of where we're going to land on some of these things as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Andy to walk you through the specifics.
All right, and just to remind you, the reason the board a couple of years ago opted out, if a property is exempt, there's no benefit in the tax cap growth rate if the property is developed for whatever reason. And pilots bring in money, but they don't help us with our structural deficit problem because we'd have to offset the levy, we can't increase the levy. So this gives us, by opting out, it gives the board options to consider when structuring pilots, and that's what you'll see here. So the immediate need, the town of Henrietta, basically they've developed a zoning plan to allow farm property to have solar farms up to 25 acres. And they're doing this as a way to preserve farmland. It has to be an active farm. Right now, small farmers are struggling financially, and what solar projects do is bring a guaranteed revenue stream and allows them to, it brings in revenue to the farm that allows them to maintain the remainder of their farmland and make it workable and economically feasible. So the town has a couple of potential solar projects that they've asked us to ask the board, if you would consider pilots. Because basically, one thing we've learned in this whole solar energy thing is no solar project in upstate New York is feasible unless there's some sort of tax break. If they become fully taxable, it'll kill any deal, whether it's the huge one at Rush or the small 25-acre one on a farm. So if the board would like to support clean energy, or in this case, support trying to allow the small farms to stay in business, we'd have to allow some sort of pilot. So that's what we need direction on tonight. Would the board like to consider that? The town's looking for a response because they won't move the projects through their whole process if the board isn't interested, because they know economically it would never go. If the board's willing to consider it, then the town would move forward. So one of the things is, as we talked about, commuter pilots don't go into our growth rate. The benefit for the smaller projects with the town, right now they're on farms are agriculturally exempt, so we get minimal revenue from them. They would lose that agriculture exemption, so we would benefit from that. It's not a big benefit, and it's not a benefit equal to the cost of the solar, but if they don't build the solar, we wouldn't get anything. So really, the idea is, would the school board be interested, and basically the town is interested in moving forward with to help protect these farms, so would the school board be willing to do it? If so, we would opt out of the exemption for these properties and negotiate some nominal pilot amount. It wouldn't be significant because the project wouldn't be viable, and we get a little bit of growth rate by the loss of the agricultural exemption. So that's where we are with the town of Henrietta. The next one we have that Bo talked about was the town of Rush. And this is really an industrial-sized solar project. The town of Rush is a smaller part of it, the Horseshoe Solar Energy proposal. Most of it will be in Livingston County, but they've proposed about 40 megawatts in the town of Rush. So the 25 acres that the town of Henrietta is talking about, that would support at most about a 25 megawatt project. In the town of Rush, they're looking at a 40 megawatt town project. The town hasn't yet given approval, so we'll stay out of that discussion. That's totally up to the town. But if they do move forward, the company has come to us and told us again, the piece in Monroe County isn't viable without some sort of tax break. And so that's why when Bo and I met with them, Bo tried to get creative. How can we have a win-win? and because the pilot doesn't go into our growth rate, some of the ideas that came out, well, how about free energy then? Because that way it reduces our expense base, doesn't affect our tax levy. Another idea that came out is Invenergy constructs our own small solar farm, so we can demonstrate the school's commitment to clean energy. It's workable, and it's visible. And where could we do it? The town does have zoning laws, so it has to be south of the thruway. And the place we have with some unused land, just south of the thruway. So at Roth, behind the baseball fields, there are some former smaller soccer fields that we don't use for any school activities now. It's about a 10-acre piece, and the value of the pilot that Invenergy would invest would probably be up to 10 acres, probably closer to 7 acres. So if the board is interested, that's certainly an option. If not, we could pursue the free energy piece. So, and the Roth piece really is contingent upon cost as well. The big unknown in all of these is what RG&E will charge for what they call the interconnection. And it all depends how much wire they have to lay to connect into their systems or whatever. So we have no idea. So, but our thought is Roth is a perfect place. We could have a small solar array. It would provide us about 1 megawatt of power, so about $120,000 annual reduction to our RG&E bill. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bo for any additional thoughts.
So what are your thoughts and what questions might you have after seeing these proposals? Is this something that you could support? Again, the ball is not in our court yet. We just tried to be proactive when we met with them to say, if this winds up being a go, then, you know, how could we get creative and work this out for something that benefits the company, but then also would benefit some of our interests around
Bo, does it have to be
being
one
green.
option, or could it be more than one option?
We haven't pigeonholed ourselves with any one option. Like I said, we talked about either the array or tapping into free energy, if you will, but that's all we really talked about. But I mean, I'm sure that there are other options that could potentially be on the table as well.
It could be a cash pilot. The other thing we looked at was just an overall reduced rate on our electricity, but our attorneys warned us we couldn't lock into long-term contracts. That'd be a violation of general municipal law. And that's how we came up with the two options.
Right.
One of the option has costs associated with it, right? If we decide to have our own panels, there's.
Yeah.
The maintenance and the interconnect fees, right?
Correct, exactly.
And what?
But it's just the startup costs. On
Well,
the,
and
maintaining.
Right.
Okay.
Which we don't know what that means
Right,
at this
yeah, we
point.
don't know
We're very early into this process.
Are there, I remember working at an energy project at another institution, and there were some grants available for the hookup costs. Through the state, so.
Yes.
Yeah, we haven't looked into
Yeah.
to that
I
yet.
mean, so what was happening is they were, it was an educational institution, so they got the product for free, and then they got a grant to help install it. And they actually, it ties right into the system and we use the energy. So there could be another way to, if you will, plumb this into the electrical system.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Social responsibility?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely in favor of clean energy. I'm looking at my own supply now with RG&E, trying to green that up. My question would be, what is the foregone property tax or school tax? I mean, school tax and I think town tax are different, right? So I don't know that they necessarily have to be bundled together on a exemption, though I guess you guys will figure that out, I don't know. But how much is the foregone school tax on one of these projects? Do you know? Are we talking 5,000, 10,000, 15? What dollars are we talking about?
Well, for the district one, it's nothing because it's school district property. For the The town of Henrietta, I'm not sure.
For the private developers, that's my question. They're saying the project is not viable without the tax
Right,
reduction.
it depends on the
And I
size
would want
of
to
the
know, are
project.
your margins so thin? You're telling me the project's not viable? I'd want to know more about, because every developer who comes to this town is going to ask for a property
Right.
tax reduction. So I'd want to know more, and maybe the town's done all the tire kicking, but if I were on this board, I'd want to do the tire kicking before.
And that's what we would, for the larger one, we would hire a consultant if it ever came to that. But first, we want to know that the board is even interested in pursuing that. But clearly, we would need to hire a consultant, because we're not experts, we don't know that. What our hunch is, the property taxes would probably be worth $300,000 to $400,000 a year on this Rush one, and what we would be getting would be about a quarter of that in value.
Why did they shutter their doors after 15 years?
So the way the solar, actually any utility is taxed, is basically on the value of the equipment. So what happens is their property value, their property then becomes assessed at the value of those solar arrays, which is significant. The reason it's not all that viable here is because the sun doesn't shine as much as, for instance, in Arizona. But, you know, so again, if you're looking at about $1 million a megawatt in terms of the value, you're looking at $5 million times, I think your rate's about $8 a share, so you're up over $400,000. This project, the small one, 25 acres, by the way, it's about 5 acres per megawatt. So 25 acres would be a 5 megawatt system. This project actually was already shut down once because RG&E came back and said $1 million interconnect. They were going to charge them $1 million to connect the stuff, and they basically said, well, we're not going to make any money, so see ya. RG&E got more reasonable about that. They actually required some equipment that did energy throttling. Long story short, they shaved that roughly $500,000 off of that. So it was back in play, but again, obviously, if I then throw just the school tax alone, so it's $400 million on top. As far as the 15 years, that's just what the state chose as far as the exemption. So after 15 years, the thing would be fully valued. Now, when you say that, 15-year-old solar arrays aren't worth what they were on year one. But at that point, then it would be taxable. The property actually does stay on roll one, which is important. Stuff in roll one does count towards your growth. However, it's the net. So the growth from the, you know, if they exempt the $5 million worth of solar array products, it's, you know, as Andy mentioned, it's the value of the property. There is some increase because it no longer would have an agricultural exemption. That's true of just the portion under the array. For this to work, the rest has to happen. One of the things we made clear to all of them in the pilot is that when we negotiate the pilot, there will be two rates. One is if it continues to be the farm, or better put, that there'll be a higher pilot rate is what happens if they don't maintain the farm. They'll get a discount if it stays agricultural. Because again, part of our goal here is, this was implemented under our Farmland Protection Act. It's only allowed in the rural residential district. And it has to, in order to get the discounted pilot, you have to be maintaining the farm. So, you know, in terms of, for the school district, so we were talking about that, Roth is in the rural residential. The pilot doesn't really apply to you because you're a tax exempt organization. Although one of the things we warned is, as long as you're using that energy, if the school turns around and sells the energy, then you're technically taxable. If you have excess energy, you just write your contract so that you use any excess energy, because Roth probably won't use a full, it will be about 1.2 megawatts, 1.3 megawatts. You would just work out a deal with RG&E that you use any excess energy to offset your energy costs at your other facilities. now it's a wash, you're using it all. So, like I said, we've looked through a lot of the legality, by the way. Andy, I was talking with Sarah today. They have found something that they're going to pursue that does allow us to treat school districts differently with regards to cell towers. So that whole issue may be going away too.
Right.
So like I said, focusing on the solar, you know, this is more or less what it kind of looks like. You know, a couple of things we're looking at is that it's putting that part of the farm that's less accessible, or the soils aren't as strong. You know, in this particular farm, the southern parcel down here is heavily farmed today. And when the solar company came in, they said, oh, well, it'd be a lot easier to just come right down here. We said no, because the whole point of this is to preserve agricultural, keep it up here where it's harder to get tractors into, where it's harder to get the better soil. You know, we're also taking into account cover, and you know, so this is surrounded by trees on 3 sides. It has a view shed to the south, although again, their whole property, the rest of the farm is to the south. So we pay attention to a lot of that stuff when we're doing this. There will be bonds. They're required to have a bond to decommission in the event that the company goes bankrupt. You know, there's always this, you hear people talk about a fear of chemicals leaching into the soil. That only happens if the array dies. If the array is active, there's no leaching. So the key is, up front, you require a bond or escrow account so that if the company goes away, you remove your panels. They'll be monitoring. If one of their panels died, they'll come out and change it immediately because they're losing money. So it's only an issue if the company goes bankrupt. That's why we'll have, like I said, either a bond or a escrow in order to pay for the decommissioning. There'll be requirements that there'll be pollinators and nitrogen fixers underneath. So while this land is not being farmed, you're replenishing the soil. The codes require a particular height so that wildlife can move underneath the panels. They can't be cemented in. They can only be pole driven or augered in, so that again, you're not putting permanent structures into the soil of the farmland. So when this is done, as part of that requirement, it is returned to farmland. Expected lifespan, again, they're typically 15 to 20 years. They'll actually work for 20 years, but typically what happens is after 15 years, the solar panel technology has progressed enough that they would more likely come in and replace it. However, when you look at it from a soil standpoint, at that point, it might be leave that, you know, build the new panels just to the south type of thing, or expose a different type of soil. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at. You know, again, the gist of it is that in this area, because of latitude, you just don't get as much energy per square foot on that solar array as you do down south. Even if you just ignore the whole cloud cover thing, even if it was crystal clear days, it's almost twice as much sun energy that hits the surface when you're for instance, down in Florida or Arizona. So the amount of energy they produce per panel is less, and therefore they do operate at very tight margins, which is why there is all sorts of support, like CERTA, including this tax break. With that said, I do agree there will be a lot of, you know, you always hear everybody, oh, I can't make it without the tax break. Well, you know, there's certain things that were like, okay, then I guess look at a different line of business. This is one particular that we think is worthwhile. You know, if I had to guess, I'd say you're looking at 2 to 3 of these. It's a maximum of 25 acres, has to be on a working farm, can't be more than 50% of the farm. So there aren't a whole lot of places in town that could go. But you know, I know of 2 individuals, this is the first one, they volunteered to be our guinea pig. Because we're putting some of the rules together as they go. And they're signing off every time we come up with a new rule, they're like, okay. That was part of the deal up front. So if you have any other questions, that's basically what we're looking at.
That's very helpful. I'm glad you were here because you answered a lot of my questions.
It's exciting.
So yeah, if you're supportive of us continuing to have conversations with Invenergy, then we will. And then for the town's purposes, we need to know if you would be supportive of entering into a pilot agreement to allow this solar project on one of our neighbors' farms.
Again, not a vote, but getting a consensus.
I think it sounds like a great idea.
With potential benefits of one or aspects of both of these bullets up right now.
Yeah, these bullets pertain to the Invenergy, the town of Rush one, so probably better to take them separate. So the first one, the town of Henrietta, you support the farmland preservation, so would you support us working with the town to come up with a reasonable pilot amount that would allow the project to go
That would
forward?
be my statement. As long as we get a fair, reasonable pilot for all of us, it's something really to look into. How about preserving our farmland for sure?
Okay. Do we have agreement on the first? Anne Marie?
I don't know enough to say yes or no.
Okay. Well, we've got a consensus? All right, and the second bullet, the
Yeah.
construction?
Well, basically, both bullets pertain to the town of Rush. If the town improves the Horseshoe Energy, are you interested in this industrial size solar farm pursuing a pilot? If so, do these options that we've talked about, are you amenable to it? Are you interested in, rather than getting cash, would you either preferably build a solar array at Roth so we can showcase what clean energy looks like, but if that isn't feasible, pursue a free energy pilot.
I like the idea of the solar panels. I think that sounds great.
I would just suggest that we could negotiate a pilot with this project that was large enough to pay for all your operating costs should you get the big pilot, so therefore there's no operating costs coming out of your budget.
That'd be great.
Or, as Doug suggested, all those grants that are floating up.
Right, or grant, and then you can essentially pocket, absolutely.
It's very,
Steve, is that Remults? Is that the one there?
This is Remults, yes.
So the good thing is, that's right next to the transportation center, so they do Christmas tree stuff, I mean, they're.
No, this one is in the very southwest corner of town. It's just north of the Transportation Museum.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, East River.
Oh, okay.
On East River, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But what I'm saying is they are farming it, and, they do sell
Correct.
Christmas trees, I mean, it is a part of the whole plan.
Yeah, that's right. So the northern parcels are Christmas tree farms. The southern parcels is it the Chase family that comes in and actively farms that. They also actively farm the parcels to the south of that one, too, right? In the Rush. So
The one piece with Christmas trees on it is kind of near the museum, and then parts that are too far away are currently being farmed by Chase Farms out of Rush.
And then there's the river on the other side, so there's a natural barrier, right?
No, the river's quite a bit ways back. We border the railroad track.
Yeah.
And then,
Well, the railroad,
between that is
Still got
all
the
of
railroad
Berkshire, but because of the topography, the natural topography, it's very screened. You can stand there and you'll never see those panels. We're requiring a significant setback from the road, and then again, to the north it's all woods, to the west it's all woods and railroad tracks, and then a change in elevation to the south. It's a band of woods, followed by the farmers' fields, followed by more woods, followed by the transportation museum.
Great. All right. We're all set. Thank you.
thank you.
Next, we have our superintendent's report.
Okay. Well, we have no written items submitted for review, consideration, or discussion, but we do have some oral items that I wanted to bring up. The first is the fiscal stress-free designation. We received word last week that we are not designated as a fiscally distressed district, which is a very good thing. That criteria is really, it's centered around two specific areas, one being economic and the other being environmental. So as far as the economic goes, they look to make sure that you have adequate reserves, which we do. So we scored very high in that area. In terms of environmental, we scored well, but it was noted that we serve a high percentage of English language learners, which factors into an overall risk score, if you will. More than 6% of our students are designated as English language learners, and our teacher turnover rate in 2018 was noted because it was at 10%. So they assign you a score in each of those categories. So we did get, I believe it was 15 points under environmental. In order to be designated in that category as at risk, you need to be at least 30, I believe. Is that correct, Andy?
Yeah, exactly.
So, so we're in good shape, and we anticipated that we would not receive any sort of a designation there because we have a history of being fiscally responsible. But nevertheless.
Question about the turnover. Does that include people retiring?
Yes.
And replacing the
Retirees,
retirements?
new hires, I mean, we grew at some levels, so that, we were growing at primary, shrinking at secondary, so it's different teachers,
Wow,
so that all
that's
factors into
interesting.
turnover.
It is.
The other one is very interesting as well, like the English language learners, that's considered a negative that we have.
I think only
people
from a
back?
cost standpoint, the cost of
Teaching,
serving
them.
serving students
Additional
would
teachers.
be
Yeah.
additional. Yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it, I guess,
Yeah.
in terms of
This is the
those-
controller, not us
Yeah,
coming
yeah,
up
it's,
with
It's
these
the
criteria.
state controller
Right.
report. Sometimes I don't understand.
Give us
it.
but
more
these are
money
the
then.
categories
Yeah.
that they look at.
Give us
yeah.
more money.
Right, very true.
I looked at that before.
But we don't have a designation there, so I
That's
thought it
good.
was important to bring it up at this table. And then we have a lot of different events coming up. I mean, you've probably noticed and felt there's just a lot going on. A lot gets, during the holiday season, a lot gets pushed till after the new year. So schedules tend to be condensed between early January and February break. We do have our second breakfast with Bo. That's going to be on Thursday at 7:45. That's going to be centered around our instructional priorities, and Dina's going to be co-hosting with me. So we're excited about that. We have policy committee at 7 a.m. on Friday. For those of you who will be participating.
So exciting.
The following week, that Wednesday, which would that be the February 2nd?
No.
Third, Wednesday's
Third.
the third.
No.
Monday's the third.
Wednesday's the fifth.
Wednesday's the 5th.
Wednesday's the 5th.
So that we'll have legislative committee on that day. That's a lunch meeting. Still looking for a board member rep. I do attend, and I have no problem taking notes. But if any of you are interested, just let us know, and we'll get you signed up for that. They do, they serve a decent lunch, and the conversation is rich. So, like I said, if you're interested, let us know. We have also on the 5th we have the grades 4 through 6 art show at Marketplace Mall from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And we also have file technology night.
No, that's been rescheduled.
That has been rescheduled?
Yeah, it will not be, it'll be in conjunction with the literacy
Do we have a
night.
new date on that yet?
Yeah, what's that, first Wednesday, March 4th, is it? I think that's that
Okay.
Wednesday.
Yes,
It'll be in
March
conjunction
4th.
with literacy and technology night. They're doing it
Okay.
together.
So we'll confirm that date and then.
It was in her e-news this week too.
Visit. Okay, good, I should read that more quickly. We have DPAC that Thursday, that's gonna be in this room at 6:30. And then on Saturday, which will be the 8th, I believe, that is gonna be the legislative breakfast. And we'll be sending out a reminder with all the specifics in it.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
School visit, the 6th.
The 6th.
The high school.
Yes, and that's on my list too, I skipped over it, batting 1,000. 7 a.m., high school Board of Education visit, and that's on February 6th, Thursday. I think that concludes the superintendent's report, unless you have some other things that I missed. Thank
Great.
you.
All right. Let's see, next we have board member reports. Informational
We have the
exchange.
claims auditor
business.
quarterly
New
report on new
business.
business.
Oh, I skipped that, sorry.
Just a review.
Nice try, though.
Yeah, I know.
I'm rubbing off on you.
New business claims audit report. Andy?
I have nothing to report on the claims auditor, unless there's any questions.
These were presented at the Finance and Audit Committee.
Yeah.
Right.
They were reviewed, so it's more like, if anybody have any questions about them?
There was one question, and I'll be sending a note out to the audit committee to explain what happened with the
okay.
question that came up.
Okay.
Perfect.
Any questions? Then let's skip to board member reports. Emery, informational exchange?
It was on restorative practices, and I don't think it's anything different that we haven't heard from Roland, unless you have something to add.
It's Perry was doing a presentation, and I thought I took over some of it.
Yes, you did.
Okay, great. Equity and Inclusion Steering Committee? May?
No.
Just Dan, I didn't bring my notes, so.
I did bring my notes, but I would just say that, this group is really getting into some meat now. We're still moving ahead even though we don't have, the next data from the survey that hasn't gone out yet to the staff, yes. But part of what our work was taking some of the information we already had and looking at what are we focusing in, what are we starting to know, and some of what our plan is going to be, that we're going to, once we get the other data, what will our plan of action be in the report that will be made back to the board. So a lot of good breakdown into some groups, a lot of good conversation. The facilitators from U of R, they had a hard time stopping us. And we were going to go over and they had to stop us. It's a great group. A lot of energy, a lot of realization that there's work already going on, and people are owning it. I mean, this group is really owning the work and really owning what they want to see happen. So I can't wait when we report out.
It's exciting. Labor Relations, James? Saw your-
We had our meeting last Wednesday, and Pat was actually part of a 4-member panel, him and 3 of his colleagues from around the county, presenting on the challenges in recruitment and staffing. And so it was an enlightening discussion. I unfortunately forgot my notes, but I did forward the minutes around.
Right, we saw those.
Yeah, the 4 big pillars they talked about were the challenges with teacher recruitment and retention. We talked about, the pipeline of local schools. We talked about, the benefits of single certification versus dual certification in certain areas where they're not lacking for teacher recruitment, phys ed, health, things like that, but how a lot of, math and science are where they really need a lot of kids coming out with the certification. Limited hiring pools for classified positions. I mean, it's challenges I think we're all facing. And there was a nice shout out by Pat, but there was, delightful reaction in the room to our, the movie theater ads that we were putting out for our bus drivers, and how and other districts were talking about the creative things they're doing. to help recruit staff in those classified positions. Challenges of wage compression we talked about, which is very, very real, and that enters into issues of making sure your staff are feeling valued, and so it's presenting challenges for a lot of districts. And then, of course, diversifying our workforce. I think we're making good efforts on our end, and it's a challenge for everybody. And just these things it's always interesting. It's true of conferences too. Like, you learn that we're really at the forefront of a lot of efforts, whether it's around labor relations or curriculum development or all the types of things we do. So in ways, it's it's kind of nice and self-affirming. So that's kind of the deal of that session. So
Great, thank you.
Yep.
MPAC?
Another good meeting.
Yeah.
We had Jamie, I always heard Jamie's last.
Jamie Scripps.
Scripps from E&L presenting to us. The videos, it was just so moving about the families that are moving in from Bataan and the Valley, and the struggles. And the video was actually about a family that relocated in Rochester, and the efforts of trying to assimilate them. But there's a family also that was in our district. And so the challenges that they face, and really I think the purpose of seeing that is to really, part of that piece of our equity and inclusivity is making people more aware of the struggles. I remember, a lot of you weren't here, we did a poverty simulation back a few years. And I had the same feeling when I saw that as when we did our poverty simulation and the struggles that they have to go through to become part of, I don't even really want to say the culture, but become a part of. And the sense of everybody in the room that was there that night, I don't know about you, Mae, but what can we do? And what is the next step? So, very moving night.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add to that?
And we can share that video too.
I think it'd be awesome if she came and presented to us. Yeah. It would just reaffirms the work that we're trying to do with our equity and inclusivity. It really does.
All right, thank you for the reports. This brings us to board recaps.
Great meeting, everyone, and lively discussions about the solar pilot agreement, and very exciting in terms of being socially responsible. And I'm glad our district is part of it. What else we have? Upcoming events: the Breakfast with Bo on Thursday, policy meeting 7 a.m. Friday, legislative lunch Wednesday, February 5th. The art show February 5th as well. DPAC Thursday, same room. Legislative breakfast, is it?
Yep.
Okay, yep. And school board visit, the high school, the February 6th, yes, 7 a.m. Bright and early, guys.
Bright and early.
Yes.
Too bad they won't have the dogs there. Did you? How cute, they had the dogs there at the high school today. Okay, that concludes our meeting. I would like to adjourn this meeting and reconvene back.
Oh, okay, so you adjourn. I'm like, what?
Adjourn and then go back into executive session. Moved by Diane, seconded by Nikki. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, see you back in executive session. I'm gonna go to the ladies first. And then I get to go right into
Here's the weird thing, you know, I enjoy going to it with my night.
I do, but guess what? I forgot my shopping bags. I gotta buy some.
I know.
Gotta buy some shopping bags. I forgot them. Oh, yes, sorry.
Sign the contract on the residence.
Okay.
Sign there.